All right, welcome back to the Victory Degree podcast. Today we have a very special episode. We are going to be chopping it up with Jonathan Abrams about high school basketball and the ecosystem of high school, college basketball, and the NBA. For those unfamiliar with Jonathan, he currently writes for the New York Times, and he wrote a fantastic book, Boys Among Men. If you don't want to take my word for it, maybe you should listen to some of the reviews from a Bill Simmons. For those who are familiar with sports and sports media, I think you recognize Bill Simmons. Bill said, a riveting read that cements Jonathan Abrams' reputation as one of the world's best basketball writers. Malcolm Gladwell, who is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, said a fascinating and unsettling account of what happened to professional basketball when teenagers made their way into a man's game. The reviews can go on and on. The New York Times book review says a gripping, deeply reported book. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining the show, and thanks so much for putting together this fantastic book.
Hey, man, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for having me on.
So let's start here. For those who are maybe unfamiliar with what the book is about, we hinted at, high school basketball and kind of how players used to transition directly from high school into the NBA. But for those unfamiliar with the book, what's the book supposed to be about?
Well, it's funny because for a long time I had wanted to be an author, and I feel like that perfect idea had eluded me. And back then I was writing for Grantland, which was such a fun time, and I loved that website, and I loved working with Bill. But I was doing a lot of profiles. And I was trying to find profiles on the most interesting basketball players, NBA players I could find. And I did one, I think, on Sean Livingston. I did one on J.R. Smith. I did one on Gerald Green. And the thought just hit me that inevitably the link that these guys had was that they all skipped college and went straight to the NBA. And even guys who had relatively mundane NBA careers, they were just, good players. Say somebody like Al Harrington or the run of the mill players, they had interesting roads, in my opinion, to get to that stability, entering that league straight out of high school. So that was kind of the thought and the idea of putting behind this book, because by then the rule had been closed for a little while, and I felt like we could put a capstone on that whole era of players.
Yeah, it's interesting. I need to go back. I think there's still an archive online of like all the Grantland articles, or at least there's like a portion of it. But I need to go back and read some of your columns on some of those profiles, because even to this day, like some of my favorite online sports reads are like investigative journalism or profiles of certain players. Like, I know you write for the New York Times. The Athletic does, I think, a fantastic job with some of the profiles that they put out. There's a couple of great authors on there, and those are always so interesting because you really start to understand like how certain players got to where they are, whether they be successes or whether they be failures, right? Quote unquote busts. And so one of my favorite parts of your book is like you took all of that, all those profiles that you just mentioned and kind of put them all together and weave them into this overarching theme of, ultimately, what differentiates certain high school players from others and why certain ones succeeded and why some others failed. And it's like, it's almost this entire collection of profiles that is, exists in one singular book.
Yeah, and I think it I remember hard trying to like think of like how to structure this book and how to weave it all together, and what the giant theme should be. And I think in the end, I tried to have the NBA and its evolution from being how it was in the 1970s, kind of this like, I guess, renegade play league that was still looking to find its place amongst pop culture, when guys like Moses Malone and Daryl Dawkins were entering the NBA straight out of high school. And then you had a big lull, and then in the mid to late 90s is just this giant explosion of kids jumping for the NBA's, initiated by Kevin Garnett. And then you had Kobe and Tracy McGrady and LeBron and those guys. And the constant was that the league and the NBA had grown leaps and bounds with these guys as they continued making this decision.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it's funny because I took notes on the book obviously for this interview, but I structured your own book in that similar manner, and I actually labeled it as like pre KG and then KG, because that seemed to be like the two defining moments in time. Where, to your point, you had the Moses Malone and the Daryl Dawkins of the world. That was certainly, pre Kevin Garnett, and then there was this huge downtime where seemingly high school players never came directly into the NBA, and then you had Kevin Garnett, who was kind of this first high school player to burst onto the scene. I'm interested. Let's go down the rabbit hole here. Pre KG, that time in the mid to late 70s. It might be worthwhile for the audience to understand kind of what the landscape of the NBA was back then, and why Moses and Daryl Dawkins, why their stories are so important to the overall story of the NBA.
Yeah, so Moses and Daryl and even Bill Willoughby was another guy who made the jump. There was the three of them. They're really the precursors to the whole big jump, because you got to think about, even back then, like college was big back then, but college wasn't getting the ratings that they got until you had Magic Johnson and Larry Bird in college. And so guys like Daryl Dawkins and Bill Willoughby and Daryl Dawkins, they jumped to the professional leagues. And I want to say Moses jumped to the ABA before the American Basketball Association, before he jumped to the NBA. But they weren't making millions and millions and millions of dollars. It was still like just a little bit of change, and they had to jump through hoops in order to make it. So that's where I think the lull came. The lull came because you weren't making that much money. You had to challenge the system, and the system was really set up against players to make that jump. And then you had the college tournament coming through, and that being able to provide the big spotlight and jumping point after Magic and Larry Bird and those guys in the late 1970s really put that on the map. So I think those factors really made an influence on that. The one thing, like, I keep going back and forth in my head on this, and just to jump forward a little bit, like, I never got this answer, but I think, talking to people who knew Kobe, I think Kobe would have made that jump had Kevin Garnett. Even if Kevin hadn't in 1995, I think Kobe would have still made that jump, and he would have been like the first one to break that whole to bring that procession back into place. But KG beat him by a year.
There was I want to get to the KG and Kobe stuff, because Kobe was there. We had Mike Silsky on the podcast, who wrote The Rise, which is a fantastic book chronicling Kobe's early years, pre NBA years, essentially from his childhood all the way up to declaring for the NBA, and then the crazy draft that happened with the Nets, and you write about it as well. But also from like a societal perspective, like the NBA was in a really weird spot. I actually didn't know about this, but I came across this article, and I forget where it was published, but there was some journalist saying, essentially, because the NBA was also struggling with ratings during that time, pre MJ or pre Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and I think there was a journalist that wrote, or not, I think there was a journalist that wrote that basically maybe the problem the NBA has is that it's too black, and it's like, how do you market a predominantly, a sport that's predominantly played by African Americans to a predominantly white fan base. And so like that, like from just overarching, like where society was at, like that, look, those were some of the issues that the NBA was dealing with, which is when you tie it back to Moses and Daryl Dawkins and some of the storylines, kind of puts it all into perspective.
Yeah, and that wasn't even an issue in the 1970s. I mean, that was an issue still now. And if you want to talk about, like, David Stern and what he implemented with having the dress code after the Malice at the Palace brawl, I think that's always been the NBA's kind of a dilemma in trying to solve and figure out, is how to kind of cater to that broad interest when most of their players represent one demographic.
Yeah, and I recently read a biography on Allen Iverson by Kent Babb, also a fantastic book. But AI was also, heavily scrutinized because a lot of people thought that he was, quote unquote, too hip hop, and he was like very authentic with who he was, with the tattoos and the way he dressed, and it irked a lot of people, and it definitely rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But to your point, right? Like that was, I mean, it's still to this day, we see remnants of it, but it just a very different culture, and the way that society perceived the NBA. I want to get to Kevin Garnett because we've labeled him, or I've at least labeled him as sort of a trailblazer with the whole high school thing. And you just mentioned, well, even if KG didn't come out, maybe Kobe still would have. I have this quote from your book that I thought was super interesting, and it came from Kevin Garnett, and he said, "I've heard that there are high school kids who are thinking about going straight to the NBA like I did. Well, they're crazy. I tell them to put aside all the money, girls, and the fame. I tell them there's nothing easy about the NBA. If I could have gone to college, I would have in a heartbeat."
Yeah, and I think that was him talking like maybe like right after his rookie year or still really young in his NBA career. And you got to think about the NBA back then as well, right? Like it's not like now like, a 25-year-old is a vet. You know?
Right.
This is back in the day when Kevin is a high school student basically, just fresh off of attending first period, and you have grown men going home and being a dad to their kids after practices, and you're looking like, man, I'm just setting up my first bank account. Like on top of everything I have to learn on the court, the physicality of the game and the mental toll it takes to travel from one city to the next and wake up early and wake up for shoot around and get ready for the game at night. And I got friends calling me up for money, and all this is going on. It's like I can imagine it's a lot. The NBA is in a completely different place now. I will also say than it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where organizations are light years ahead, where, organizations have seen this. Like, I remember talking to Tyson Chandler for this book, and Tyson got drafted to the Chicago Bulls. And it was basically like he ended up in the middle of Chicago, like by himself as an 18-year-old, like with no direction, no anything on what to do. That doesn't happen nowadays. Organizations have people who will hold your hand through every process on and off the court. So I think the NBA recognized that they could do more. And back then, like the crux of one thing I hope that this book expressed, like it mattered what organization these players landed to early on in their careers. Like you could land into an organization like the Bulls, and I give Jerry Krause and the Bulls like a bit of leeway because they're coming off of those Michael Jordan championship years, and they're trying to rebuild, and they're used to having veterans and professionals, and maybe they don't have the infrastructure in place for people as young as Tyson Chandler and Eddie Curry were at that time. But it mattered. I think the Indiana Pacers were a team who had like the infrastructure in place to allow people like Jermaine O'Neal and Al Harrington to develop on their own time versus Tyson had to age and find maturity elsewhere in his NBA career.
It's interesting you bring up circumstance because that's one of the things you talk about in your book, where one maybe commonality that you found is that a player's surrounding and the circumstances that they either had going for them or going against them, ultimately decided a lot of their fates. So like and we'll get into it a little bit, but there's a bunch of players. Leon Cook, I believe his name is. You brought up Bill Willoughby. Like, there's a bunch of players who had all the potential in the world but never panned out. And then you have the flip side where it's like guys who had a lot of potential but did pan out. And you brought up circumstances, one of those things. Now, to your point, it feels like at least when they're drafted into the NBA, they have everything that they would ever need, right? Like that, like the teams provide everything for them. So I guess I'm interested now, like, what do you think is the main reason why certain NBA players don't pan out or end up, I guess, being a bust in the NBA?
Why now or why back then?
Why now?
Now it's a good question. I think there's some players who have had attention on them since they were in elementary school, and if you've been told you're the best for that long, and you keep progressing and progressing and feel like you're the best, maybe you don't know what it is like to strive and be that type of hard worker. A lot of the guys like back then in the mid 90s when they made the jump, and guys who maybe didn't turn out, there's a couple things like I wanted to get back. It was like or that I wanted to get across in the book. So one of them was like our definition of what a bust is and what a failure is, because some guys had really long, productive NBA careers, and maybe they weren't going to be like the stars, like maybe they weren't the Kobe's or the LeBrons, but they still had 12, 13, 14, 15 really successful careers, even though they came out of high school, and they were able to maximize their earning potential during that time because they weren't playing in college, or they didn't spend 2, 3, 4 years in college. I think that was worthwhile to point out. And I think that the other thing that's different today that's helping guys today is that it's not just the teams that are providing for guys. And I know that this doesn't completely answer your question, but it's something that I had in my head. The guys are coming in today with their own trainers, their own nutritionists, their own chefs, their own coaches. They have all this in place, so they have their own infrastructure and their own plan put in place, like separate from the team. So relying on the team as much as they did back in the day, it's not a thing. I think we've evolved and grown.
What impact do you think social media has had on NBA players coming in? And then I think it would also be interesting to think about like if social media was around to the extent that it is today, like when KG and Kobe were coming into the league.
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question that people always wonder, like how Michael Jordan would have been had social media been a thing back then. I think it weighs on I think it weighs on people heavy. Um, you know, I'm starting to work on a new book right now about the Oklahoma City Thunder teams with Harden and Westbrook and Durant, and it's interesting because it coincides like with the rise of social media. So you wonder, or I wonder, like, social media and its impact and its dawning sway and potential, and how much attention was given to that as that teams were being developed. How much that played a role. I think now social media plays a huge role because it's something else that you give attention to that isn't basketball or necessarily growing your skill set on the court. But it goes hand in hand with trying to maximize your earning potential and your brand. So it's that whole double-edged sword.
I think MJ would have had a field day with social media. I think he would have. I mean, at this point, I'm just throwing out hot takes, but I think he probably would have had a burner like KD had, and would have just been going back, back at it with fans. I think he was just like too big of a competitor. I think to maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like he'd have a field day with social media.
Maybe it's interesting to think about. It's either that or like he shuns it and doesn't use it at all, or has somebody else running it because he doesn't want to get distracted. I don't know.
All right. Well, and it's crazy too because now with social media, it's like every single play is scrutinized, right? I mean, especially with sports betting now. We had Drew Hanlon on the podcast recently, and he's the skills trainer for Tatum and Embiid and Maxey and a bunch of guys in the league. We talked a little bit about social media and sports betting and how it's impacted the game. Where now it's like, Joe Schmo has a, plus 550 parlay and he needs Embiid to grab 2 more rebounds. And if he doesn't, he's going to go on social media and, talk trash to Embiid and say stuff that he would never say in person. And like, whether or not Embiid sees it or not is not the point. The point is that, these players now, it's like every single move that they make on the court has some sort of like ramification way beyond the actual game. Which is a crazy amount of pressure.
Yeah, I think if I would hope that players don't pay attention to that, because I don't know how you could operate under that insane microscope to where literally like you know you can't do right. If he's like scoring, if he helps his team win, then another set of bettors is probably losing money. So like you literally can't win any way you think about it. So I would hope that players don't give that much attention, but we're all human, and if you're reading and hearing about your stuff in a negative connotation or light, you wonder about whether it does hold impact or sway.
Exactly, and like I want all the fans who talk trash on Twitter or whatever, and talking trash is part of the game. I'm not saying that we're not allowed to have opinions. I'm just saying if you took your day-to-day job, right, or anything that you do, let's say podcasting as an example, and if you were scrutinized to the point where it's like, hey Nick, you said 7 times during this podcast. Like you're a piece of trash. Like you're terrible. Like just think about like if everything you did was viewed under that amount of scrutiny and that microscope, how that would impact you.
No, I
It's
know
crazy.
the leads for my stories would get laughed at most of the time. You know, nobody ever likes to see your first take out there. You know, it's
Right.
we're all rough drafts until we put even social media, right? We're talking about social media. Who is gonna put the first thing that they take and just their first picture, like just put it up there on IG? That's not the world we live in, but you know, athletes have to get judged on what they do on this shot or that shot, who they pass to, will they grab this rebound? It's insane to think that they're going to be under that type of microscope and filter.
Yeah. What are they doing on the Thursday night when they don't have a game? Who are they getting lunch with? Like, I mean, all of this stuff. Like, you know, but anyhow, getting back to KG, because I want to spend a little more time on him. What did you learn? You obviously did a lot of research on him for the book. Just like general thoughts on KG from your research.
Yeah, I think KG was impacted by. He had a high school teammate named Ronnie Fields who was a phenom and a star, and he got hurt in a car accident, if my memory is holding right. And I believe that had a big impact on KG and wanting him to maximize his career. He grew up most of his life in South Carolina, and then he went to Chicago for his later year of high school, and I feel like that shift played a big role. And it is also interesting too because of where he went in the draft and where Kobe went in the next year, where you see these teams, they see this otherworldly talent, but it's like they don't trust themselves quite yet to take it, and that's why somebody like Kobe can slip all the way to 13th in the draft when he goes when teams are amazed by his skill set, but they're also in their head thinking that this is a high school player and why draft this high school player and try to project where he's going to be, where we can draft this college junior or senior and he's more ready to step in and fill these minutes for us.
That's a really good point because I think at the end of the book there's a quote from, and I'm trying to find it because I wrote it down. And it was really good. I think it was from Arn Tellem, the NBA agent, and I can't find it, which is great. So, oh, here we go. It's not a quote, but he basically talks about how, um, and we'll get into the draft. You know, the Kobe the '96 draft. But basically, Arn was talking about how what they did to get Kobe on the Lakers would never happen today because of what you just mentioned, which is these teams not being able to properly evaluate these high school players and not having the confidence to put their job security on the line, drafting this virtually unknown talent out of high school.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really true. You juxtapose it Kobe back then against Cooper Flag now, where Cooper would have already been the first pick, obviously last year. It's just a different world, and guys have been seeing these different players since probably before they were in high school. So they've been scouted inside and out. Whereas somebody like Kobe, I'm sure that for a lot of NBA teams back then, likely the McDonald's All American game may have been their introduction to Kobe.
Right. One thing that stood out to me about reading about KG from your book is that he was super nervous in this workout that he did in front of this group of NBA execs and scouts, which is like this huge dichotomy in my head because like I mean I grew up watching KG and he was like the most fearless, you know, badass basketball player to ever play. Like he would talk trash to anyone who wanted to hear it, and he seemed like he wasn't afraid of anyone. But then there's this high school kid who's working out in front of these NBA, you know, executives, and he's super nervous.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess we all have those moments before we reach our origin stories, right? where
Right.
where it's KG I mean, he's a kid. He was a kid back then. It's interesting to juxtapose that because that's the KG we know is like the scowling, screaming, intimidating one that we saw for almost 2 decades in the NBA. But he was definitely nervous before his NBA workout. But then you take that against somebody, and I keep coming back to him because I think he was a true outlier in all this. Like I think any organization Kobe would have went to, I think he would have excelled because that was his mentality and mindset. Um, Even back then, and Kobe wasn't nervous at any of his workouts. He was taking it to Michael Cooper and dominating. So we're all human, and once you get under that pressure cooker, being in that type of situation for the first time, you never know how you're going to react. But safe to say that the KG we know and love and fear got out of that role pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think he, yeah, I think he, yeah, made his way in the NBA pretty quickly. Listen, we've brought up Kobe many times, so let's get to kind of Kobe and how he ended up on the Lakers, and a lot of it had to do with the '96 draft. And it's interesting, like if you know Kobe's backstory, having grown up in Italy, moving to Philadelphia, like he himself said that he felt more Italian than American for a lot of his high school career. Um, and you have this guy, this high school phenom, that somehow drops to the 13th pick in the '96 NBA draft. How does that go down, and why does Kobe not go to New Jersey?
Yeah, so that was one of my favorite chapters because I think I went through like every team and like was able to pinpoint, okay, just like why they made the mistake here, why they made the mistake here. Back then, back then we're still in the big man age, right? Where like you get a talented big man and you think that that's the unicorn, where we're still throwing the ball into the post and we're trying to find the Patrick Ewings of the world. We're still taking uh what's his name, Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan. uh, the NBA was one way back then. So Kobe is 6'5". He's not KG. KG's 6'11". He goes the year before him. So and Kobe is the first guard who jumps from high school to the pro or attempts to. So in that draft back then, all right, first of all, we have Allen Iverson. Allen is he's short, of course, but he's dynamic. He's proven himself in college. He's the number one pick. Then we have some big guys. We have Marcus Camby and Sharif Abdur-Rahim, and those guys are seen as talented big guys. Stephon Marbury is another guy who's proven himself in college. Ray Allen. You can't really fault any of these picks too much yet. Antoine Walker, he proved himself. Lorenzo Wright, another big guy. Kerry Kittles and the Nets is at number 8. Now, John Calipari was the coach of the Nets at that time, and Calipari was set on taking Kobe. But I'm trying to remember the exact story of what happened. I know that Arn and the Lakers bluffed them really, really well, right? They said that Kobe was not going to play in New Jersey if John Calipari was going to take him. And John Calipari, he's just getting into the NBA. He's proven himself in college, but he's still relatively young in his NBA career. His whole Kentucky stint has not happened yet. So he's still, kind of nervous, trying to learn how to prove himself in the NBA. He's willing to take Kobe, but I don't think he could convince the ownership. I think that's what it was. So he passes on Kobe, and he feels like that was the best workout he had ever saw was with somebody like Kobe, but they end up passing. Then you have Samaki Walker, Eric Dampier, Todd Fuller. Now we're getting into the Nick. We're getting into the questionable guys here. We're getting into the questionable guys, where
Hey, Eric Dampier had a solid NBA career. He was a very serviceable center.
he was a very, very serviceable center. Was he a top 10 NBA player of all time? Was he a top NBA player on any of his rosters that he was on? He was
I
good for
plead
the
the
Mavs
fifth.
for a little while. He was good for the Mavs. You know what? I'm not gonna. He was a good serviceable NBA player. Um, but the next one was Todd Fuller. And now, yeah, now we're getting into the runs of centers. Todd Fuller goes to the Warriors. I think the Warriors may have taken Latrell Sprewell or had Latrell Sprewell on their roster at that point. And Latrell was a good swingman. Then the Cavaliers take Vitaly Potapinko. And then after that, the Hornets pick next, and the Hornets they take Kobe with the obvious intention of trading Kobe to the Lakers for Vlade Divac. And I was growing up in Southern California at that time, and I remember I was a big fan of Vlade. Vlade was a good player, and he came back to almost haunt the Lakers when he played for the Kings later in his career. But the combination of Kobe and then also that was a summer that the Lakers got Shaquille O'Neal. Ooh, that was a good summer.
Not a bad summer for the purple and gold. I want to spend some time on this draft because to me this is like one of the most consequential drafts of all time, if I can speak. And it gets me fired up, and I can tell that it gets you fired up too.
It is because we I didn't even mention the two picks after Kobe, where it's like two really really good players with Peja Stojakovic and two-time MVP Steve Nash.
Yeah, I mean, just a boatload of talent. You mentioned Vlade, and it's interesting how. So I'm of Serbian descent. Like Vlade is also of Serbian descent. I grew up a Sacramento Kings fan. Unfortunately, if I could go back in time and tell myself, "Hey, don't become a Kings fan because they're going to suck for 20 years," I probably would not have become a Sacramento Kings fan. But here we are. And
Real
so
quick. I know this is a quick diversion, but for people who don't know, like watching those Kings back in the day when they had Vladi and Mike Bibby and Doug Christie and Peja Stojakovic and Chris Webber, that was like the prettiest brand of basketball to watch back in the day.
absolutely, team. It was literally team basketball at its finest. Like it, if you want to go watch a team that was very clearly, had high chemistry across all their players, knew exactly where everyone was going to be. I mean, if you just saw some of the passes that Vlade would, I'll never forget. Like Page on a back cut, and like Vlade hits him right in stride, or like even like Doug Christie on a back cut, and like Chris Webber was a great passer too. Unfortunately, he had the knee injury that kind of derailed his career, but like he was still like a very talented guy. But
And Brad Miller and White
Brad
Chocolate,
Miller,
man,
yeah.
those teams were good.
Our six man, Bobby Jackson. Bobby Jackson was a fantastic guy,
Hmm.
fantastic player. Doug Christie, by the way, doing a fantastic job so far with the Kings.
He
Did
does. He
not
seems
like,
like he really, really cares.
yeah, did not like the Mike Brown firing, but I guess it has worked out so far. But Vlade was interesting because there's this story of how he was initially reluctant to go to Charlotte. Which if you're getting traded from LA to Charlotte, I could see why. But then he says like basically he did it. He said he'll give it a go because he just loved Dr. Jerry Buss, who was the owner at the time. Like he respected the Lakers and he kind of wanted to make it happen for them, which is ironic because the Lakers, from like 2000 to 2004, basically owned the Kings and prevented them from winning a championship. So it's like this full circle moment of like Vlade saying, "Hey, I basically want to do something nice for the Lakers," and then like 10 years later, that same Lakers team is dominating the Kings.
Yeah, yeah. With that, I mean, it wasn't dominating. Like that was.
I mean,
When's that Robert? What year was the Robert Ory tip out?
I think
Or the Robert Ory shot? It was.
was it 02 or 03.
Yeah, I mean that those games were as close as could be. Those series were as close as could be.
Also, Game 6 rigged. I believe that.
That was a Tim
Definitely rigged.
Donaghy game. Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely rigged. I was joking around with somebody on the pod that like I like that series scarred me, and that Robert Ory shot has scarred me. It's funny because I reached out to Robert to have him on the podcast, and like if he does come on, like one of the first things I'm going to say is like thanks for the trauma, thanks for like altering my brain chemistry. Um, but where was I going with this? I have no idea where I was going with this. Game 6. I completely lost my train of thought.
No,
See,
we were just
Robert
talking
Ory.
about Vladi and going to Sacramento.
I'm telling you, man. As soon as I mentioned Robert Ory, like the brain
I
just, it
know.
just, it's just like
That's
instant trauma.
all you can think about. And it's funny, like experiencing that on the other side, just the pure jubilation, and that's one of my like
Yeah,
foundational sports memories.
yeah. Well, that's great, man. I'm happy for you. Oh, I know where I was going with
I'm
this.
sure. I'm sure.
Yeah. I was talking to someone on the podcast, and I say how like I'll go back to YouTube and like watch highlights from that game, and when it gets to the end, where like obviously Ori sinks the three, like I'll watch the highlight, but in my brain, I will almost envision this like alternate reality where it's like as I'm watching the highlight, I'm like, dang, Vladdy's gonna grab the rebound. Like, and that's it, like game over. Or like, Shaq's gonna tip it back out, but it's gonna go into like the backcourt and like it'll be Violet, whatever. And it's just like, it's definitely traumatic.
I remember the series of events that had to have occurred for the Lakers to win that game were just outrageous.
Yeah, crazy. So 96 draft. One of the most interesting things I didn't know was the Sixers. So you mentioned AI, but it was interesting because the Sixers were the hometown team for Kobe, having grown up right outside of Philly, and they like Kobe. And there's this whole thing that I'll let you explain where they almost could have had Kobe.
Yeah, Kobe was working out at a Philadelphia gym against college and pro players a lot where the 76ers personnel would see him. And I think Tony DeLeo was part of the 76ers organization at that time, was friendly with Kobe, and his dad had put it in the ears of the 76ers organization that they should draft him. Um, but that's right. They had Jerry Stackhouse at that time as well. And they thought that would be two guys at the same position where Allen Iverson could play point. But yeah, or they could have. I'm trying to think. Could they possibly have had Iverson and Kobe? Was that the?
Because I think they wanted to trade Stackhouse for a lottery pick and then use that lottery pick to potentially draft Kobe.
Yeah.
Was like the premise.
Yeah, that's what it was. And excuse me because I'm asking you about my own book, but it's been a little while since
No, it's been a minute, man. Listen, I just finished rereading it this morning, so I'm a lot more fresh on, on the details.
But yes, that was it. It's funny to think about that. What if? Could you have imagined? Like, would they have killed each other, or would they have been the greatest dynasty or the greatest guard tandem in NBA history?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that Kobe. It's really interesting to think about because AI was always like the late to practice, did not practice.
Well, I mean that was Kobe's whole issue with Shaq, was that he felt Shaq didn't work hard enough.
Right. But like I think an element of that too was like Kobe's issue with Shaq also kind of, now Shaq did his own thing, but also kind of kept Shaq in line a little bit. Like there was some limit to like how much Shaq could goof off. Like at the end of the day, like it was all fun and games, but when it got down to actually playing and winning, like they still managed to do that. So like I'm interested. It's interesting to think about like with AI, like would Kobe have been able to like, push AI to this new level and only care about winning and for, kind of take him away from some of the off the court stuff. I don't know. Could he have gotten AI to buy into playing defense more? Granted, AI was undersized, but like, could he have cared more? I don't know. And that's one of those things that it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. It certainly is. I think Kobe probably benefited from having a point guard like Derek Fisher throughout most of his career. Yeah, so I wonder like what type of big guy, like they would have had to get like a Theo Ratliff, Dikembe Mutombo type guy who didn't take
Big
up
Z.
too much space on offense and just clog the paint.
Yeah. Big Z would have been a good fit. Also, same draft. This just came to me because I was looking at all the teams. I had written down all the picks before Kobe. Besides the Sixers, there's like so many interesting storylines. You had Toronto at number 2, which would have been less interesting because Toronto was kind of a new team. Vancouver, who nobody cared about, even though, listen, I'm born in Vancouver. Nobody cared about the Grizzlies. Milwaukee, which was interesting because Mike Dunleavy had this like whole plan of.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Mike's plan.
All right, so explain Mike's plan.
I'm trying to. What? All right, again, because you just finished this book. I remember it was like convoluted, but it all made sense in the end. What was it again?
Have you ever seen that, real quick? Have you ever seen that meme where it's like, I forgot what TV show it's from, but it's like the guy
It's Always
who's
Sunny.
like this.
It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, and he has like on the board like all of the whatever.
Yeah, I love that show. That's why I know it straight off the bat. But Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that was Mike Dunleavy. But basically, Mike Dunleavy wanted
it's like
to
a Ponzi
trade
scheme, if I remember.
something like that, man, where like he wanted to they had the, let's see, they had one, two, three, they had the fourth overall pick, and he wanted to trade all the way back from 4 to 8 to then draft Kobe at 8. And they did trade, well, he pulled off one of the trades because they traded Ray Allen for Stephon Marbury. So that was one of the trades that he did pull off. But his idea was like, I'm going to trade back all these picks. I'm going to get 3 first-round picks, like future first-rounders in return, and also draft Kobe. The only problem was that Kobe never worked out for Milwaukee. So, like, that's where it kind of fell apart.
That's what it was. But I feel like Mike knew like Kobe was gonna be good, or had seen him elsewhere. Maybe like knew his dad. I feel like there was
See,
some
now you're making me.
He knew
Now
that Kobe was good.
Now I really want to like read it word for word and see what happened, because you're right. It was crazy. If I find it, I'll try to. Let me see, Colangelo. So this is Phoenix. I don't know. Maybe if I go back far enough, let me see. All right, whatever. I'll try to find it as we talk. So that was crazy. And then Boston, who you said took Antoine Walker, fine. Clippers, which there's now that video that surfaces every once in a while of like Kobe's workout with the Clippers, which is him just like running back and forth and draining like every shot that he takes. And then New Jersey, which we talked about, Dallas. Dallas would have been interesting because if they still had gotten Dirk, right, like Kobe and Dirk, what would that have looked like? Indiana, Golden State, and then Cleveland. Cleveland is interesting because Cleveland in this like alternate universe drafts Kobe, ends up being really good, right? Probably doesn't get the first overall pick in 03. Don't draft LeBron. Like, it's just like this cascading effect of like what would have happened if Cleveland got Kobe.
What was Cleveland's excuse for not taking him? Was it just that Kobe didn't work out for them?
Cleveland's excuse for not taking Kobe is, I think they wanted a big man because they drafted Potapenko and then they also drafted Big Z in that same draft. But where's the part? Where chapter is this? Oh, here we go. All right, hold on. Coming on it right now. So Cleveland, the Cavaliers plucked Vitaly Potapenko with the 12th pick. Cleveland center Brad Daugherty had recently announced his retirement because of lingering back pain. I definitely wanted size in the draft, said Wayne Embry, Cleveland's general manager.
That's what it
As it turned out, Zydrunas Ilgauskas was available and we got him. I easily could have taken Kobe and drafted Zydrunas. So...
Well, at least you can admit.
Yeah, at least. And I guess while we're here, we can go revisit the Milwaukee thing. So I'm trying to summarize this real quick. So Milwaukee wanted to draft Ray Allen. And then you literally write, then Dunleavy erected what amounted to a pyramid scheme. He agreed to select Stephon Marbury 4th for Milwaukee and trade him to the Timberwolves for Allen, who would be selected 5th by the Timberwolves. The Bucks would receive a future first-round selection in the deal. And then also it's interesting because Minnesota, and you have it quoted here, the reason Minnesota didn't draft Kobe is because they had just drafted KG, who was also a high school player, and Kevin McHale, who was the GM, I think, right, of Minnesota at the time, was like, hey, drafting 2 high school guys in a row, like, what are the odds that they both pan out? So, KG and Kobe, I mean, what could have been?
Right.
Okay, so then Dunleavy wanted to trade Allen to the Celtics for Boston's 6th pick and another selection. He had another potential deal with the Nets and Calipari in place for the 6th pick and another future pick for their 8th selection. Dunleavy said he would have taken Bryant with the 8th selection and departed with the 3 extra picks. He even told Joe Bryant that Kobe could live at home with him and his teenage son. But I'm trying to see... Yeah, Arn Tellem declined Dunleavy's request for Kobe Bryant to work out. And then I think the owner of the Bucks said, well, if you can't work him out, you can't pick him.
Yeah, that's what it
So
was. Oh, and then yeah, so the 13 through 20 of that 96 draft is really amazing because you get Kobe at 13, Peja Stojakovic at 14, Steve
mhm.
Nash at 15, then Jermaine O'Neal at 17, another high school to NBA guy and one of the first, and then Big Z at number 20. Yeah, that draft is really amazing. And Derek Fisher was number 24 in that draft.
Fisher wasn't drafted by LA, right?
Yeah, he was.
He was. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy draft. Like we said, very consequential. For a lot of reasons, a lot of what ifs too. Like we just went over. That honestly probably altered NBA history for a while.
No, without a doubt.
There's another very interesting person in all of this, and his name is Sonny Vaccaro. Um, who is he, and why is he important to Kobe's story?
It's interesting because I just talked to Sonny last week.
Oh, nice.
Sonny is a very important person in basketball history because he is the person who essentially linked shoe money to the NBA. So he was instrumental as a point person in signing Michael Jordan to Nike. There was that Matt Damon Ben Affleck movie about uh was it Shoe Dog, I think, that was about Sonny signing Michael Jordan that came out last year. So that was Sonny, and then as his career progressed, he's like a interesting, really interesting guy, a fast talker, a schmoozer. He falls out of the favor in Nike, and he goes to Adidas. And once he gets to Adidas, his mindset is, okay, Nike is gonna have the college guys and the college programs in their pocket already because I built that up there and I'm not there anymore. But now I can kind of almost sweep the rug out from underneath them and get the high school guys who are coming into the league early. So if you look at the initial slew of high school players who came into the NBA, guys like Tracy McGrady, guys like Kobe Bryant, guys like Kevin Garnett, they weren't signing with Nike to start out their careers. They were signing with Adidas, and they were signing with Adidas because of Sonny Vaccaro.
There's a quote from McGrady in your book. He said, "Adidas gave me a $12 million contract." Shit, enough said. And that is, he said that is apparently somebody asked him like, "Why did you go to the NBA straight out of high school?" And that was his reasoning.
Yeah,
Amazing.
love
McGrady's
that.
also an Orlando kid. I think he grew up like 45 minutes from Orlando, which is kind of cool because he ended up on the Magic.
Yeah,
But
no,
again,
we're talking
another high
about
school
like
guy.
what ifs. Like another one of those great what ifs is what if Tracy and Vince Carter had stayed together longer in their careers.
Yeah. Why do you think that Tracy left because he didn't see a path to becoming like the guy on Toronto?
Possibly, and it could possibly be closer to home. I think at that time that pairing with Orlando, it was supposed to be Grant Hill, who was still in his prime. Nobody knew like what his injury derailment was going to look like. And they also supposedly were going to sign Tim Duncan away from the San Antonio Spurs. So Orlando was in the market for all three of those guys. It's interesting that really the only guy who ever played for them was Tracy.
Not a lot of magic in that plan. That's a reference to Disney World. A
Dun,
bad
dun.
one. Yeah. And the crowd goes wild. So Sonny Vaccaro, very important figure, like you just mentioned. He had a quote here that I also liked. He said, "I believe I made two bets in my life professionally: Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Two pretty good bets, I'd
Two
say.
pretty good bets.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
too shabby."
Yeah, he had the ABCD camp that he did too, where he was able to get all the best high school players in one place. So he was able to see them early, pick them out early, and be able to build those relationships with those players early.
So you brought the ABCD camp. Let's touch on that a little bit more because there's also ramifications from that ties to LeBron and some other guys. So what was the camp? How did it start? What did it end up becoming?
Yeah, Sonny Vaccaro, he built up the camp. He used to have the round ball camp, which was college players, and I think as time went on, he formed the ABCD camp. So it would be every summer in New Jersey, the top players, high school players from around the country would vie for this camp. And this is essentially pre-internet. So there'd be like magazines that would have rankings, but nobody's really seen videos or footage of people one-on-one. It's before ESPN is putting any high school games on TV. So essentially you're coming in there with your reputation more than anything else. And LeBron, when he was, I'm pretty sure he was a junior, he came to the camp, and Lenny Cook, this high school legend in New York City, was this consensus amazing player. Was just this phenom whose potential was supposed to be unlimited. And essentially, LeBron and Lenny faced off at their ABCD camp, and LeBron ended up coming on top. And a lot of people, I think Sonny may have even been quoted on this. They saw it almost as that was the beginning of the rise of LeBron, coincided with the downfall of Lenny, because Lenny ended up not playing 1 minute in the NBA.
Yeah, I think there's a specific shot too that you outlined, this like crazy shot that LeBron hit over Lenny. And Lenny was like in disbelief, and he was like, "LeBron, how did you hit that?" And LeBron was like, "I kind of just threw it up." He was
Oh, yeah.
like, but the story of Lenny Cook is very important, and it brings up the point of, we've talked about all the guys who made it, right? The KGs, the Kobe's, T Max, Stephon Marbury, like all these guys that came out of high school and not only had great NBA careers, but for some of them, you could argue top 10 in NBA history with Kobe, and obviously LeBron. But then there's like this whole crop of players who, the Lenny Cooks of the world, the Corleone Youngs of the world, these guys that had the potential but just never panned out. And in Lenny's case, I'm interested, why did he not pan out? And I know at the beginning of the pod we talked a little bit about like commonalities between some of the guys who maybe didn't pan out. Maybe it was circumstance, maybe it was surrounding and stuff. Like, how do those themes weave into Lenny's lack of an NBA career?
Yeah, I think it possibly could have been too much too early for him. Maybe he was anointed before he was ready, didn't strive or see the light to trying to just dig in and work and try to get the most out of your potential. Especially if people are, you're a kid, you don't come up with a lot, and people are already anointing you and giving you things, and you're still in high school. You may think that the world may be at your oyster till the next big thing knocks you off of that pedestal before you're even able to fully stand on it. So I think that's could have been one of the main factors with him. I will say, like, again, like the point that like I try to make is that like there are so many success stories, and even if you don't think of somebody as one of the top 20 NBA players of all time who came out of high school, I can name so many guys who had really, really good careers, like not just average, but above average careers who came out of high school, and that would be the majority of guys who came out of high school. I think if NBA personnel were making these types of choices and getting these type of hits on guys who were out of the NBA or who were in college for 2, 3, 4 years, having the type of success, Hall of Fame, All Star rate that we see from the guys who came out of high school, they would be happy and it would be amazing. You're never going to be 100% hits with anything because nothing is a sure thing. But I think the by and by the guys who came out of high school had a large impact on the league, and I feel like there were way more players like Kobe and LeBron and Tracy McGrady than there were guys who ultimately didn't make it in the NBA.
Do you think that this idea of that you are owed something played a factor? And the reason I bring it up, because there's this quote from Flip Saunders in your book that really stood out to me. And Flip said, when you feel like you're owed something, you're never going to respect the game the way it needs to be respected.
Yeah, without a doubt. Uh, I feel like that's the case. And again, I feel like that's less the case this day and age. I feel like people are, these young players who enter the NBA today are already used to viewing themselves as business entities and growing their business from a young age and taking care of stuff on and off the court. So, the whole old stuff I think is kind of out the window. But back then, 20, 30 years ago, it was more the Wild Wild West, and people were figuring it out on their own by and large.
Right. Crazy to think that 2004 was 20 years ago. By the way, that still messes with my with my brain.
It is,
Um,
my friend.
yeah, way different times. So as we kind of wrap up here, so LeBron obviously goes in '03. In '04, there's 8 high school players selected in the first 19 picks. One of those guys is J.R. Smith, who you highlight in the book. And then 2004 as well, we brought up the Malice at the Palace. If you are an NBA fan and you do not know what that is, shame on you, first of all. Second of all, go on Google and look it up. And it's one of the crazier NBA moments that I can think of that has happened on the court, at least, in the last 20 years, where basically, there's this, I guess, kind of a scuffle that breaks out between the Pacers and Pistons on the court. And then, Ron Artest ends up laying down on the scores table, and some fan throws I think, Diet Coke or something at him. The fight ends up going out into the stands, and there's this whole slew of fines and suspensions that David Stern brings down on, Artest and Steven Jackson and all these different guys. And then it kind of kicks off, and we touched on it a little bit, this like whole image issue that the NBA was trying to deal with. Can you explain a little bit what was going on with that?
Yeah, I think at every point the NBA is going to try to protect its bottom line. It's like any corporate entity where it was threatened. I think at that point in time, where is the NBA quote unquote a bunch of thugs. The NBA, I think, was looking to protect its image, and that's when the dress code came in. And shortly after, that's when the one and done rule was implemented to have players basically be uh, at least a year removed from high school before they were draft eligible. That came into place. So I think Kevin Durant and Greg Oden was the first class that had to go to school for a year, or at least be a year removed from high school.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that all transpired, because the ban on high school players also included, the fact that NBA scouts and NBA personnel were not allowed to go to high school games. Like, they were not allowed to go scout, like actually scout high school players in any capacity. Um,
Correct. And it's interesting how you kind of come full circle to now the NBA for the last couple of years had sponsored a G League team basically of guys who had decided not to go to college but wanted to enter professionalism quicker. Um, Everything comes full circle. The whole thing is that you can't deny prodigies and talent, and I feel like that is the case with athletes and NBA players too. Nobody's talking about a tennis player who's a prodigy turning pro early, or a soccer player, or even a musician. Why it takes the place with the NBA, who knows? I mean, I think we do know to a certain degree, but
that's a good point, man. I mean, soccer players, I feel like, are signed like at the age of 16. They can like play for their club team, which, like,
yeah,
I think at 16 I was probably trying to like up my KD ratio on Call of Duty. Meanwhile, these guys are like playing
or
for Real
you're
Madrid.
even like Luca. Luca has been a professional since
Yeah.
he was 16 overseas with Real Madrid. And I wouldn't say that stunted his career by any means. It probably accentuated and helped it.
Well, isn't it funny too how when he was coming out, I will always remember this because my Kings had the second overall pick, and we took Bagley over Luca. But one of like the pros of Luca was that he had been playing with grown men for so long, like since the age of 16, and he's used to playing against grown men, and he's used to the speed and all this stuff. So it's like ironic how that ended up being like a selling point for Luca.
Exactly. And I think the same was true with Ricky Rubio, a few other players who came from overseas.
Right. Jonathan, I got two more questions. One of them is more of a topic, but we'll try to do this quickly. One guy that we did not bring up was Kwame Brown, which anytime I say the name Kwame Brown, I think of Stephen A. Smith's rant. The Lakers traded away Kwame Brown, just an all-time sports moment. But Kwame Brown was an interesting prospect, and it was also interesting the way that his career panned out, because Michael Jordan ended up taking him first overall, but then also ended up playing with him on the same Wizards team. So let's spend maybe a minute or two just Kwame Brown, the way his career unfolded and why you think he didn't pan out.
I mean, he's one of those guys who, when it comes into my head, I think of him as a success. He had a long NBA career. Was it his fault that he was the number one pick, especially as Michael Jordan is coming back, and obviously not the same Michael Jordan, but probably has the same type of Michael Jordan expectations on him. Um, it wasn't. But then you look at the average NBA career is what, like 3 4 years. He stayed in the NBA for more than a decade. Made a good career. I think having that number one, like even somebody like Anthony Bennett, people get that number one pick label, and some people think that you should be a star no matter what. But you don't argue where you get drafted, and if a team doesn't have that infrastructure ready for you, and for the things that we talked about back then, where am I going to live? How am I going to open up a bank account? What am I going to do at night? We're going to practice for 2 hours during the day. I'm just out of high school. What am I supposed to do with the rest of my day? I don't know any of these life lessons that possibly I would have learned from going to college. So in order to start out in the NBA under that light, and then be able to manage and navigate it for years and years and years, I think it's a credit to those guys.
What was Kwame's relationship with Michael when they were playing together?
Yeah, if I remember right, I think Michael was just demanding of everybody, and he wasn't the player that he used to be at that time, and he didn't have the teammates. There was no Scottie Pippen on those Wizard teams. I want to say, was Jerry Stackhouse on those teams? I'm trying to think of who else was on those teams. It's like Jerry Stackhouse. He had Charles Oakley that was on those teams.
Yeah,
Uh, but I remember, like, yeah, it was tough watching Michael Jordan at that stage.
yeah, it was. I'm trying to look it up here real time. See who was you had Kwame Brown, Brian Cardinal, Juan Dixon, Brandon Haywood, Larry Hughes, Jared Jeffries, Christian Leitner, Tyronn Lue. Yeah, it's Charles Oakley, Jerry Stackhouse. Yeah, I mean, just you know, some guys that were way past their prime, or some young guys who were probably a little too early on in their careers, who actually had pretty solid careers.
Yeah, it's tough to make a lot out of those teams.
Yeah, Jonathan. As we wrap up, we're not going to hold you captive any longer. You obviously, clearly, as we've talked about today, wrote a book on high school players and their journey to the straight to the NBA. As we talked about, it has since been outlawed. I think in 2022, the NBA reinstated the rule that scouts could now go to high school games and scout high school players. So I guess part of it has come back a little bit. There's always the ongoing debate of, do we allow high school players to go straight to the NBA? There's the side of the aisle that says, well, maybe a year in college might be beneficial for their maturity, for them to learn the ropes a little bit. There's the other side of the aisle that says a year really doesn't do anything. It also keeps them from maximizing the money that they can make. Wild stat, but only 20% of NBA players are over the age of 30 currently. So I
Wow,
actually looked it
I
up
don't
this
think I
morning.
knew that.
Yeah,
That's
I
wild.
mean, just wild. So
I'm
clearly,
gonna I'm gonna have to. I'm never gonna. I'm gonna have to give up my dream of playing in the NBA.
yeah, well, um, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry it didn't work out. So, your earning window is small. And so that is the argument for, the side of we need to let high school players play because, as it, with anything else, you want to maximize your earning potential. having laid out those arguments, obviously you having done research for the book, and even still to this day you write about sports and basketball, and are very familiar with the economies of the four major sports. Like what's ultimately your opinion?
Look, I would love for people to be able to bet on themselves and earn as much money for as long as they can. So I've always been of the mindset that people should be allowed into the NBA as soon as they're ready, as soon as a team thinks that they're ready. That was my mindset when I was working on the book, and my mindset today. I can also understand it from the perspective of the players' union. It's not just the NBA who does not allow the people or the players to come straight from high school now. It's also the NBA. They're the union. They're trying to protect union jobs of players that are already in the NBA. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. I don't think right now the best system is in place, but I think the NCAA is that such a conundrum and so messed up right now that it's hard to really get any type of continuity going from the NCAA to the professional sports leagues, the NFL included at this point. I think NCAA probably has to figure out a lot of things in their house right now.
Well, it's also interesting because there's the argument that players should, like the whole one and done thing, um, shouldn't be allowed, and that players should stay out of college for like 2, 3, 4 years. And when you think about like some of the talent I think back to those Kentucky teams or even Kansas teams, it's like, what would have looked like if, Kyrie stayed for 3 years, right? Instead of the 1 year. So it's like the argument in favor of the college basketball product.
Yeah, and I will say that that's one thing that I really, really, not one thing, but something that I really enjoy about the women's game is that in college you're allowed to see the teams and the players develop from year to year. So you're able to see Caitlin Clark be a freshman, then, you know, uh, and Paige Beckers, and I went to USC, so I'm loving watching Juju play right now. So that is one of the benefits of the women's game is you're able to follow these programs year to year. Even right now, like following like football, I don't even you watch college football. I don't even know who's going to be on the team week to week, let alone season to season. You know?
Yeah, it's a revolving door. I mean, the NIL has obviously a lot of pros, but one of the cons is that it's become like a pro sports environment where you know players just move
It,
around.
yeah, it's pro sports without any of the type of equality or rules or structure or whatever you want to call it to make it like make sense of it.
Right. So we'll end it here because you brought up the NIL. Ultimately, do you think it's good for college sports, or do you think it's done more harm?
Oh no, I think it's definitely good. People need to get paid for their talents. It's just there needs to be some type of evening or leveling of the playing field so that everybody's working under the same set of rules or guidelines. So that way you can, talent will win, not just somebody having the deepest pockets.
Yeah. Yeah, almost like a salary cap, which I don't even know what that would look like in college football. But well, Jonathan, we've taken up enough of your time. I appreciate you coming on talking about the book Boys Among Men. If you have not read it, highly suggest you go pick up a copy. It can be found anywhere you buy books. If you want to learn more about the history of the NBA and about how these phenoms came to be, specifically the ones that went straight from high school to the pros, highly suggest. And like I said, don't take my word for it. Take Bill Simmons, the Wall Street Journal, Malcolm Gladwell. Take their words for it and pick up a copy. Jonathan, before we sign off, where can people find you and more of your work?
You can hit me up at the New York Times website or on X or Instagram. I'm at JPD Abrams. I appreciate it so much, Nick.
Love it, man. Again, appreciate the time, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, have a good one.